I never thought the sharpest knife in my life would be my own daughter's tongue. I never imagined she'd let her husband laugh at me in front of the grandbaby while they shut the door on me in the Cleveland winter. But what they didn't know was that fate had tucked a set of keys into my pocket, and those keys opened their front door. Get ready, because this isn't just a story, it's a reckoning. Comment where you're watching from and don't forget to subscribe for more true family betrayals. My name is Evelyn Monroe, though most folks in my church just call me Evie. I'm 66 years old, born and raised in Cleveland, Ohio, and if you ask me, I've lived a lifetime of carrying weight that was never mine to carry. My hands are still rough from decades spent serving food in a high school cafeteria, and my back reminds me every morning that double shifts never come free. Still, I always thought my sacrifices would mean something, that they'd plant seeds in the life of my only child, Camille. I raised Camille mostly alone after her father, God rest his soul, walked out when she was still in middle school. I carried 2 jobs, took buses across town in the dead of winter, and skipped meals so she could have her school uniforms pressed and her field trip fees paid. I was never glamorous, never wealthy, but I believed that steady love and sacrifice were enough. But what I didn't know was that the very girl I had poured myself into would one day become my sharpest wound. Camille grew up with a hunger for more than I could give, more than I could ever afford. She wanted the shiny things in the shop windows, the handbags her friends' mothers carried, the cars with leather seats that passed us by on Euclid Avenue. And when she married Trent Hale, a man slick with words and heavy with pride, that hunger grew into mockery. It started small, the kind of little barbs you try to brush off. She'd say things like, "Mama, you just don't understand how the world works. Nobody respects cafeteria ladies anymore." Or Trent would laugh at the way I saved plastic grocery bags in a drawer, calling me relic and cheap. But over the years, those little cuts became open wounds. They didn't just tease me, they mocked me. They turned my struggles into their entertainment. One Christmas I gave Camille a handmade quilt, every square stitched from scraps of Noah's baby clothes and old dresses I had saved. She unwrapped it in front of Trent and his friends and laughed. "Mama, nobody uses these anymore. You could have just gotten me a gift card." The room roared with laughter and I sat there clutching my coffee cup trying to hold back tears. The older I got, the worse it became. They didn't just see me as old, they saw me as nobody. A woman with no power, no money, no worth. I remember one winter afternoon, Cleveland cold, the kind that makes the air bite at your bones. I stopped by Camille's duplex in Ohio City just to see my grandson Noah. I knocked with a small bag of groceries in my hand, a few things I'd bought with my coupon savings. Camille opened the door with Trent standing behind her. He didn't even let me step inside. Instead, he smirked and said, "Here comes the charity case." Camille laughed. My own daughter, she laughed. And then, right there in front of my grandson, she said, "Mama, you've lived your whole life small. You're never going to be anything more. You should just accept it." Her words landed like ice water poured over my heart. That day I realized something. To them, I wasn't just a mother or a grandmother. I was the punchline to their cruel jokes. Now, I need you to understand, this isn't the kind of story where I cry forever in the dark. I'm not telling this for pity. I'm telling it because the world has a strange way of turning tables when you least expect it. And though Camille mocked me as a nobody, though Trent sneered and treated me like less than the dirt under his boots, life wasn't done writing my story. See, the thing about being underestimated is that people stop paying attention to what you're really capable of. They never noticed the way I still kept ledgers balanced at church, or how I paid attention to the little details others missed. They didn't see that I still knew how to save, how to hold steady, how to watch quietly while the proud tripped over their own feet. That's why I'm here speaking to you now, not as the woman they laughed at, but as the landlord they never saw coming. Before everything turned sour, before the words "nobody" became my label in my daughter's mouth, life was quieter, though never easy. I spent decades on the grind, working in the cafeteria of a high school on the east side of Cleveland, Ohio. The work wasn't glamorous, hairnets, plastic gloves, trays of steaming mashed potatoes, but it was honest and it was steady. Every paycheck, no matter how small, was my shield against the cold world. I lived in a small brick bungalow my late mother left me. It was far from new, The pipes rattled, the windows whistled every time the Lake Erie winds howled. But it was mine, and more importantly, it was home. I raised Camille in that house. I can still see her as a little girl running down the narrow hallway, her braids bouncing, her laughter echoing off the faded wallpaper. I gave her everything I could, sometimes things I didn't even have to spare. When Camille was in high school, she wanted a trip to Washington, D.C. with her history class. The cost was more than 2 weeks of my pay. I remember sitting at the kitchen table, the light flickering above me, deciding which bills I could delay just to make sure she went. I picked up an extra shift and pawned an old gold bracelet that had belonged to my sister. Camille went on that trip. She came back with souvenirs and stories, but never asked what it took for me to get her there. That was fine by me. I didn't expect thanks. I thought my sacrifice would buy her a brighter future. I encouraged her to apply for nursing school after graduation. I sat with her while she filled out applications, even helped her practice for interviews. She got in but didn't finish. She said studying was too much pressure, and that she had better options. I swallowed my disappointment and reminded myself that paths change, that maybe she just needed time. When she met Trent, that's when the cracks really started to show. He was all charm and smooth talk, the type of man who wore cologne heavier than his intentions. At first, I was happy Camille had found someone who made her smile. But Trent's smile never reached me. He would look at me with that grin that said, "You don't belong in our world." He drove a used Cadillac and acted like he owned downtown. I noticed how Camille began to shift around him. The girl who once wore thrift store finds proudly with my careful alterations started sneering at my second-hand clothes. The daughter who once helped me clip coupons at the kitchen table now rolled her eyes whenever I mentioned saving money. "Mama," she said one day, "people respect success, not scrimping." I wanted to tell her that respect built on money alone was a fragile thing, but the words got stuck in my throat. So I stayed close. I watched Noah, my grandson, whenever they needed. I cooked Sunday dinners, stretching one chicken into a feast the way my mother had taught me. I gave Camille the love I thought would anchor her. But she and Trent, little by little, began to treat my presence like an inconvenience. One summer they moved into a duplex in Ohio City, a neighborhood that was slowly filling with coffee shops and new condos. They bragged about the location, about how they were on their way up. I helped them move boxes though my back ached. I remember sweating through my old floral blouse while Trent leaned against his car with his arms crossed, watching me. No offer to help, no word of thanks. After that move, the gap between us widened. They stopped inviting me for dinners. When I dropped by unannounced, Camille's smile was tight, like I was an interruption. Trent's jokes turned sharper. "Careful, Evie," he said one day, "don't scratch the hardwood with your old shoes." Camille laughed. I laughed too, but my heart didn't, so I excused it. I told myself maybe it was just the stress of building a young family, of paying bills and juggling jobs. I reminded myself of the times Camille was still soft, like when she called me for recipes, or when Noah ran into my arms with a shout of, "Grandma." I clung to those moments. Looking back now, I realize I ignored the warning signs. The way Trent always talked about winners and losers. The way Camille's words slowly began to echo his. The way they began to measure people not by kindness or sacrifice, but by square footage and bank accounts. I had built my whole life on endurance, on making do, on love without conditions. They were building theirs on appearances. And appearances are fragile. They crack easy, like thin glass in the cold Cleveland wind. At that time, though, I didn't see the storm coming. I just kept showing up, kept giving. I was the babysitter, the cook, the quiet support in the background. I believed, naively, that love would be enough to bridge the growing canyon between us. But the truth is, love isn't enough when respect is gone. And in Camille's eyes, under Trent's influence, I was already slipping from mother to nobody. The day everything truly broke still lives in my bones like an ache that won't leave. It was mid-January in Cleveland, when the snow piles up on the curbs like dirty mounds of sugar and the air slices into your lungs with every breath. I had slipped on black ice walking from the bus stop after a late shift and bruised my hip so badly I could hardly move. The doctor told me to rest, but rest doesn't pay bills, and at my age missing work meant more than just a lighter paycheck. It meant risking my job altogether. I thought maybe Camille would understand. After all, she was my daughter. She had a warm house with 2 spare bedrooms, and I was only asking for a few nights, just until I could manage the stairs back at my bungalow without pain. So I bundled myself up in my old wool coat, carried a paper bag with some bread and canned soup I'd picked up with food stamps, and rode the number 22 bus across the river to Ohio City. By the time I reached their duplex, the sky was dark, the streetlights glowing orange halos in the snow. My hands were stiff, my hip throbbing, but I held on to hope. I thought surely my daughter would open her door. Camille answered after a long pause. She had her hair tied up, dressed in a sleek sweater I'd never seen before, the kind that didn't come from thrift shops. Behind her, Trent stood in the living room, a smirk already tugging at his lips. "Mama," Camille said, sounding more surprised than pleased. "What are you doing here?" I shifted the bag in my arms and explained, slow, careful, how I'd fallen, how the doctor told me to rest. "Just for a few nights, baby," I said, forcing a smile. "I thought I could stay here if it's not too much trouble." Before Camille could answer, Trent chuckled. "Hear that, Cam? She wants to move in." He looked me up and down like I was a stray dog. "No offense, Miss Evie, but we don't exactly have room for charity cases." The words stung, but I waited for Camille to defend me. He didn't. Instead, she laughed, soft at first, then louder when Trent egged her on. "Mama," she said, shaking her head, "you should have planned better. You can't just show up like this." My throat tightened. I whispered, "I just need a couch. For Noah's sake, he'd love to have Grandma here for a few nights." At that moment, my grandson peeked from the hallway, rubbing his eyes. "Grandma," he called, his small voice tugging at my heart. I smiled and waved, but Camille quickly stepped in front of him. "Back to bed, Noah," she ordered. Then she turned back to me, her eyes colder than the snow outside. "Mama, you've lived your whole life small. You're never going to be anything more. You need to accept that and stop leaning on us." Her words fell heavy, sharper than the winter air. They weren't just dismissive, they were humiliating. And Trent, standing there like a king on a throne he didn't own, pulled out his phone and started recording. "Say it again, Cam," he said between laughs. "Tell her she's nobody. People online eat this stuff up." I felt my cheeks burn hot despite the cold. My daughter, my only child, laughed in my face while her husband filmed it for amusement. My bag of bread and soup felt like dead weight in my hands. I begged then, my pride crumbling in the doorway. "Please," I said, tears threatening to spill. "Just a few nights. I won't be in the way." But Camille shook her head. "No, Mama. You made your choices. Don't drag us down with you." Then without another word she closed the door. I stood there in the snow listening to the lock click. My own daughter had shut me out, not just of her home but of her heart. Behind the door I heard them laughing. I shuffled back to the bus stop, every step a dagger in my hip, every breath a cloud of shame. People passed me by, not knowing the storm inside me. I wanted to scream, to cry out to the night that I was not a nobody. But the words stayed trapped, heavy as stone in my chest. That night, sitting on the cold bench under the flickering streetlight, I realized something that cut deeper than the bruise in my hip. I had given everything to Camille, and in return she had given me humiliation. I wish I could say that was the end of it, but it wasn't. Later, I found out that Trent had actually posted that video, my plea, my tears, on some social media page captioned with "Lesson, don't be poor." It got laughs, shares, even comments calling me pathetic. And Camille, she let it stay up. My own daughter let strangers mock me. That was the night something in me broke. The woman they thought was weak, the mother they thought was small, she died on that bench. What rose in her place was a woman determined not to be stepped on again. They called me nobody. But what they didn't know was that nobody can become somebody when life puts the right key in their hands. After that night at Camille's door, something in me went silent. I didn't tell anyone at church about what had happened, not even my closest friend, Sister Loretta, who usually caught everything written across my face. I just went about my days in quiet, carrying the bruise in my hip and the bigger bruise in my heart. The winter pressed on. Cleveland winters are cruel, snow that turns gray before it melts, wind that sneaks through every crack in the windows and sidewalks slick as glass. I walked slower, leaning heavy on my cane, and every step reminded me how alone I was. My daughter's laughter haunted me. Her words echoed, "You're never going to be anything more." For weeks I lived in my little bungalow like a ghost. The heat was spotty. Sometimes I'd sit wrapped in 2 coats with a blanket over my legs, listening to the old furnace wheeze like it was gasping its last breath. I tried to distract myself with crossword puzzles and sermons on the radio, but my mind kept drifting back to that closed door, that locked laugh. One bitter afternoon I decided I couldn't sit inside anymore. My pantry was low and I needed to ride the bus into town for groceries. As I stepped carefully along the icy sidewalk in Ohio City, I passed by Camille's street. My chest tightened at the sight of her duplex, standing tall with its fresh coat of gray paint, the porch light glowing even in daylight. I kept walking head down when something caught my eye. A sheet of bright yellow paper was nailed to the wooden post in front of the neighboring duplex. The bold black letters read, "Notice of delinquent taxes. Property subject to auction." I stopped in my tracks. My heart beat hard in my chest. The house looked just like Camille's. Same design, same age. I leaned closer, squinting through my bifocals. And that's when I realized, it wasn't the neighbor's building. It was Camille and Trent's duplex. The yellow paper flapped in the icy wind, announcing to the whole street what they had kept hidden. They were behind on property taxes. And not just a little behind. The notice said, "Multiple years of delinquency." I stared at it, the words swimming in front of me. My first reaction wasn't triumph. It was disbelief. Camille and Trent, who mocked me for being poor, were on the brink of losing their home to the county? My knees trembled and I gripped my cane tighter, steadying myself. I felt the cold bite at my cheeks as I stood there, but inside me something strange began to stir. A flicker of possibility. A whisper that said, "Pay attention." I tore a small corner from the notice where the auction details were printed. I slipped it into my pocket like a secret. The whole way to the bus stop I kept touching it, making sure it hadn't blown away. It felt heavier than paper. It felt like a door cracking open. The next day I went to the public library downtown. It had been years since I'd walked through those tall glass doors, but I remembered the smell of old books and polished wood. I approached the reference desk, nervous but determined. "Excuse me," I asked the gray-haired clerk. "Could you help me look up property auctions?" His name was Mr. Lang, and he wore thick glasses that magnified his kind eyes. He tapped at his computer, then printed out a stack of papers. "These are the properties scheduled for the upcoming county auction," he said. My hands trembled as I flipped through the pages, until I saw it. Camille's address. My breath caught. There it was, in black and white. If no one paid the delinquent taxes, her building would be sold at auction. Anyone with the money could bid. I sat at a corner table in the library, staring at those papers, my heart pounding louder than the radiator. For the first time in a long time I didn't feel small. I didn't feel powerless. I felt like fate had dropped a card in my lap. But then came the fear. I was a cafeteria worker living on a pension and Social Security. I had no savings, no nest egg, at least not in the traditional sense. How could I possibly buy a property? And then I remembered. My sister Marla, God rest her, had left me a small insurance payout when she passed 2 years earlier. I'd tucked it away, untouched, afraid of using it wrong. I'd also been saving quietly in church envelopes, dollars and quarters stacked carefully over the years. It wasn't much by the world's standards, but maybe, just maybe, it could be enough to make a move. That night, as I lay in bed under 3 blankets, I whispered to myself, "They thought I was nobody. But maybe, just maybe, I've been holding the key to everything all along." The humiliation at that door had pushed me to rock bottom. But sometimes rock bottom is where you find the foundation strong enough to build on. And I was about to discover just how strong mine was. The day after I found Camille's address on the county auction list, I woke up before the sun. I made tea, pulled my ledger from the drawer, and laid out everything I owned that could be turned into a bid. I wrote down my monthly pension and Social Security, the small insurance money my sister Marla left me, and the church envelopes I had tucked away over the years. I stared at those numbers, steadying my breath. This wasn't pride. This was survival and maybe, if God willed it, justice. I went back to the downtown library where I'd met Mr. Lang. He was at the reference desk again, kind eyes behind thick lenses. I need to understand the auction rules, I told him. He printed guides from the Cuyahoga County website and showed me where to call for exact steps. Arrive early, he said, pointing with a pen. Bring cashier's checks for the deposit. Read the fine print. And don't let the room rush you. I thanked him and slid the papers into my old blue folder. On my way out, I saw a sign for a senior legal aid clinic meeting in the multipurpose room. I stood at the doorway until a woman with a neat gray bob waved me in. Her name was Attorney Morales. I took a seat in the back and listened while she explained basic protections for elders, what an LLC was, how to keep property separate from personal drama, and why privacy sometimes keeps you safe. Afterward, I waited until everyone had left and asked, if a person wanted to buy property at a county auction and keep their name out of the mess, could they do it through an LLC? She nodded. Yes. It's common. File with the state, get an EIN, open a small account. Keep records. And be careful with tenants. Tenants. My own daughter and her husband. Kept my face calm. I didn't say a word about the address. That evening I called my church friend Deacon Robert Harris. He once ran a plumbing business and knew his way around paperwork. Deke, I said, I need a quiet favor. Help me file an LLC. I can't say what for right now, but it's important. Deacon Harris didn't ask questions. He just said, come by the office tomorrow. We'll take it step by step. The next day we sat in the church's small admin room with a computer that took its time. We filled out the online filing for an Ohio limited liability company. When it asked for a name, I typed Lake Erie Trust LLC. The words looked right, grounded, local, bigger than me but born of my waters. We listed a P.O. box I rented that morning so nothing would arrive at my bungalow. We paid the filing fee with my debit card. The confirmation page flashed. I printed it and slid it into the blue folder with the rest. Next, get an EIN, Deacon said. Then open a basic checking account for the LLC. Keep every receipt. By noon I had both. The banker, a young woman with a quick smile, congratulated me on my new venture. I nodded and tucked the starter checks into the folder. I felt calm, the way you do before a storm when the air goes still. At home, I counted what I could pull together without risking the roof over my own head. Marla's insurance money had sat untouched for nearly 2 years. I whispered a thank you to her picture on my dresser and deposited it into the LLC's account. I added a small lump sum option from my pension I had never activated because I was saving it for someday. Well, someday had arrived. I gathered a little more by selling a few pieces of jewelry I never wore and an extra sewing machine I kept in the closet. The number in that account grew enough to make me believe this was more than a wish. I told no one what I was doing. Not Sister Loretta. Not my neighbors who liked to talk on their porches, and certainly not Camille. I kept my head down, my words few, and my papers in order. When fear crept up, what if I lost the bid, what if I made a mistake, what if this was foolish? I breathed and reminded myself that humility isn't weakness. It's focus. The morning of the auction, the sky was pale and brittle. I wore my good coat, the gray wool one I saved for funerals and special church days, and I tucked the cashier's checks into a zippered pocket inside my purse. I arrived an hour early at the county administration building. The hallway outside the auction room buzzed with people. Contractors in work boots, investors in crisp suits, a couple clutching a binder, a man with a ball cap pulled low. A seriousness hung in the air. My heart thumped like a drum in a quiet room. Inside, a county official explained the process. Properties would be called one by one. Bidders must show proof of funds. Deposits due at once. The remainder paid by deadline. Failure meant forfeiture. I took notes even though I had read all this twice. I needed my hands doing something steady. When they called Camille's address, something inside me straightened. I stood. The opening number was the delinquent taxes and fees. Less than a private sale would command, but still a heavy lift for me. A man in a blue blazer bid first. Another bidder countered. I waited, counting my ceiling in my head, the number above which I would not go. When the room paused, I lifted my card and stated my bid, voice even. The blue blazer man watched me then countered. I did not glance away. I bid again a little higher. He hesitated, looked to the woman beside him and shook his head. The official scanned the room. Any further bids? Silence settled, thick as molasses. Sold, he said, naming the price, and just like that, the house my daughter used to measure her worth shifted into the hands of Lake Erie Trust LLC. I did not smile. I did not tremble. I walked to the front, presented my ID and cashier's checks and signed the sale documents. The clerk, Ms. Patel, explained next steps, the balance deadline, the confirmation, the deed recording timeline, and how I'd receive the stamped copy. Owner of record will be the LLC, she said, stamping a receipt. Mailing address is this P.O. box? I nodded. Congratulations, she added, not knowing the story stitched into my yes. Outside, the winter air stung my cheeks, but it felt different now. The cold wasn't a punishment. It was a kind of wakefulness. I stood on the sidewalk and whispered, "Thank you, Marla." I thanked God for a clear mind, for paper that turned into walls and a roof, for the quiet power of patience. Over the next weeks I followed every step. I paid the balance before the deadline. I kept copies of bank slips, receipts, and every stamped page. I checked the county recorder's site from the library computer until the deed status changed. The day the envelope arrived at my P.O. box, I sat on the bench outside the post office and held it for a long moment before sliding my finger along the seal. Inside lay the recorded deed, the county stamp crisp and black. Owner of record, Lake Erie Trust LLC. I traced the letters with my thumb. I didn't walk to Camille's duplex that day. I didn't call. I didn't rush. This wasn't about gloating. It was about setting things right with care. I went to a small print shop and made 3 copies of the deed. Then I bought a simple folder that snapped shut so nothing would fall out. I stored 1 copy in my church locker, 1 in my home safe, and 1 in the blue folder. I also scheduled a quiet appointment with a property management company I'd researched, Ortiz Property Management, to discuss next steps for notice, rent, and repairs. I told the receptionist I represented the owner. No more, no less. We set a meeting for the following week. My plan was simple. Keep the management company as the front, keep me in the background. No shouting. No scenes. Just boundaries and law. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with the deed in front of me and the house warm for once. I wrapped both hands around my mug of tea and breathed in the steam. I was still the woman who saved grocery bags and stretched chicken into 3 meals. I was still the grandmother who cried when Noah said my name. But I was also something else now. A landlord. Not through luck and not through spite, but through a door that fate opened when humiliation tried to bury me. The next chapter would not be easy. Trent would snarl. Camille would rage. People would show themselves. But I had learned the power of quiet preparation, and I had a folder thick with proof. When the time came to reveal the truth, it would not be fireworks. It would be a steady light in a room that pretended I wasn't there. And for the first time in a long time, I slept without waking from the sound of my own heartbeat. The deed lay in the safe, and my name, protected by the LC, rested where their laughter could not touch it. The weeks after the auction were quiet on the surface, but beneath that calm I could feel the ground beginning to shift. I kept my head low, walking the same route to the grocery store, sitting in my usual pew at church, smiling when Sister Loretta asked me how I was holding up. Outwardly nothing had changed. But in truth everything had. Behind the scenes, Ortiz Property Management had taken the reins. They sent out formal notices to every tenant in the duplex, including Camille and Trent. The letter explained that Lake Erie Trust LLC was now the official owner of record, and that all rent payments, maintenance requests, and lease renewals would be processed through Ortiz from that point forward. I remember the day Ortiz mailed those notices. I had gone into their office downtown. A modest suite with tan walls and a faint smell of coffee and printer ink. The manager, Mr. Ortiz himself, a kind but sharp-eyed man in his 50s, slid a stack of envelopes into the outgoing bin. "It's always interesting when ownership changes hands," he said, glancing at me over his glasses. "Some tenants handle it fine. Others, not so much." I nodded, holding my tongue. If he knew that one of those tenants was my daughter, he gave no sign. That was how I wanted it. Clean, professional, no cracks in the story. I had learned the power of silence. Sure enough, within a week, the ripple began. Camille called me one evening, her voice tight. "Mama, have you heard about this? Some company called Ortiz is saying they own our building now. Rent's supposed to go through them. Do you know anything about this?" I forced a small sigh. "No, baby, I don't know anything about it. Maybe the old owner sold. These things happen." She groaned. "Trent's furious. He says he's not paying some stranger. Says he'll figure out who they are and set them straight." I murmured, "Well, landlords are landlords. You can't just ignore them." But I left it at that. My words were light, but inside I felt the faintest flicker of satisfaction. As the first month rolled on, cracks in their pride began to show. Trent, I later learned through Ortiz, was already late with rent. He had excuses. The paychecks at the plant were shorter, the car needed repairs, they'd been overcharged. Ortiz tacked on late fees, firm but fair. Camille called me again, this time with a whine instead of a bite. "It's like this new landlord is watching us like a hawk," she complained. "We never had late fees before." I bit my tongue so hard I nearly drew blood. They never had late fees before because they used to own the place or thought they did. Maintenance requests piled up too. Trent complained about a leaky faucet, about a drafty window. Ortiz sent their handyman who documented everything and charged fees for what fell under tenant neglect. Every invoice chipped at Trent's pride, and Camille's voice grew sharper each time she called me to vent. Meanwhile, I kept steady. I went to church, I baked sweet rolls for the seniors' luncheon, I hummed hymns while I cleaned my bungalow. But behind those simple rhythms I tracked every report from Ortiz. Rent late. Fees added. Complaints rising. The pressure was mounting and I could feel it like steam building under a pot lid. Then came the evening when Camille's mask slipped. She showed up at my bungalow unannounced, a rare occurrence. She stood in my doorway, her arms crossed, a storm in her eyes. "Mama," she started, "Trent says this landlord's trying to take advantage of us. He's been looking into Lake Erie Trust, trying to figure out who's behind it. It's shady." I leaned on my cane, calm as stone. "Companies buy property all the time, Camille. That's not shady, it's business." She frowned. "But why us? Why our place?" I shrugged lightly. Maybe it was just time. Maybe the old owner wanted out. Camille looked at me long and hard, as if she sensed I knew more than I was saying. But pride kept her from asking the right question. She shook her head, muttered something about vultures, and left in a flurry of cold air. I closed the door gently and leaned against it, my heart pounding. She was circling closer to the truth, but not close enough. Not yet. The following week, Ortiz scheduled a lease conference with Camille and Trent. Late rent, maintenance negligence, and rising hostility had made it necessary. I asked Ortiz if I could attend quietly as the LLC's representative. He agreed. I sat in the corner of the small conference room, the hum of fluorescent lights above, a stack of files on the table. Camille and Trent arrived together, Trent puffed up like a rooster, Camille tight-lipped and restless. "This is ridiculous," Trent barked, slamming his hand on the table. "We're not paying made-up fees. We've lived here for years. We know how this works." Mr. Ortiz was calm. "The lease terms are clear, Mr. Hale. Rent is due on time. Repairs caused by neglect are billed. If payments aren't made, further action will be taken." Trent sneered. "We'll see about that. You don't even know who you're dealing with." I sat quietly, hands folded, heart steady. They had no idea who they were really dealing with. Not yet. That night, back at home, I opened my blue folder and ran my hand over the deed once more. The pressure was building on their end. Bills piling, pride cracking, anger spilling over. And soon, very soon, the truth would come out. But for now I stayed patient. Because sometimes the sweetest justice isn't loud. It's quiet, steady, and undeniable. The day of the reveal came like a storm I knew was brewing but still caught me breathless. Ortiz had called a formal lease violation conference downtown. Rent had been late 3 times. Fees had stacked high as snowdrifts. Trent had sent threatening emails, all bluster and no sense. Camille had left voicemails in tears, then silence, then anger again. I decided it was time. I wore my gray wool coat and carried the blue folder tucked under my arm. Inside it, the stamped deed, every receipt, and the cure or quit notice Ortiz had prepared. My cane tapped steady against the tile as I entered the conference room, small and square, with fluorescent lights buzzing like restless bees. Ortiz was already there, papers laid out neatly. When Trent and Camille arrived, the air shifted. Trent barged in first, chest puffed, jaw tight, his cheap cologne filling the space before his words did. Camille followed, her eyes darting nervously, her lips pressed thin. They sat across the table, glaring at Ortiz. "This is harassment," Trent barked. "Late fees, threats of eviction, you're not gonna scare us." Ortiz didn't flinch. He folded his hands. "Mr. Hale, Mrs. Hale, these are standard lease terms. If payments are not brought current, the owner has every right to pursue eviction." "Owner?" Trent spat the word like it was bitter. "Who even is this owner? Lake Erie Trust? Some faceless company? Tell them to show their face. I want to see who thinks they own my home." That was my cue. I shifted in my chair, letting the scrape of the legs against the tile draw their eyes. Slowly, I opened my blue folder and slid a single page across the table. The county deed, stamped official. "I am Lake Erie Trust," I said softly. "I own this property. And I am the one you've been paying rent to." For a moment, silence filled the room. Trent blinked as if he hadn't heard me right. Camille's mouth fell open, her face pale as fresh snow. "Mama," she whispered. I looked her in the eyes. "Yes, Camille. The mother you mocked as a nobody. The woman you filmed crying on your porch. The grandmother you told your son was worthless. I am your landlord." Trent snatched up the deed, scanning it, his face twisting red. This is a trick. Some scheme. You couldn't possibly." "It's no trick," I interrupted, my voice steady as stone. "This is the recorded deed. Purchased legally at auction. Paid in full. This home belongs to me." I reached into the folder again and pulled out the cure or quit notice. Sliding it across the table, I said, "And unless your rent and fees are brought current by the deadline, you will vacate. Those are the terms." "My terms." Camille's hands trembled. She looked between me and Trent, tears pooling in her eyes. "Mama, you can't do this. We're family." "Family." I leaned forward, my voice low, not angry but firm. "Family doesn't laugh at a mother in the cold. Family doesn't post her humiliation for strangers to mock. Family doesn't call her nobody. You made your choice when you closed that door on me. And I made mine when I opened another." Ortiz cleared his throat, breaking the silence. "The notice is clear. You have until the stated date to comply." Trent slammed the paper back on the table. "This is ridiculous. You won't get away with this." I stood, pressing on my cane for balance. "I already have," I said. "You can pay like any other tenant or you can leave. Either way, the days of mocking me are over." Camille's tears spilled then. She covered her face, shoulders shaking. But I didn't reach for her, not this time. I walked to the door, each step echoing louder than their protests. When I stepped outside into the cold Cleveland air, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not revenge, not triumph, but dignity. The weight of their laughter slid off me like snow melting from a roof. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't the one standing outside a locked door. I was the one holding the keys. When the reveal was done, I thought maybe they'd simmer down, maybe accept the truth and make their payments like anyone else. But pride doesn't give up easy, especially not Trent's. 2 days after the meeting with Ortiz, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Camille. For a moment I hesitated, thumb hovering over the green button. Then I answered. "Mama," she said, her voice sharp and raw, "how could you humiliate us like that?" I closed my eyes. "Camille, I didn't humiliate you. I did what you left me no choice but to do. You mocked me. You shut me out. Now I'm simply holding you accountable." She sniffed. "Trent says you set us up. He says you waited for us to fall behind, then swooped in like a vulture." My lips pressed tight. "A vulture feeds on the dead. I'm alive, Camille. I've always been alive. You just refuse to see me." Before she could answer, Trent's voice thundered through the speaker. You think you can control us? We're not paying you a dime. We'll fight this. You'll regret messing with me. I didn't raise my voice. Then you'll pack your bags. The marshal will see to that. And with that I ended the call. My hands trembled as I set the phone down, but my heart beat steady. That was just the beginning. By the end of the week, the family group chat lit up like a bonfire. My nieces and nephews, cousins I hadn't heard from in months, all suddenly had opinions. Evie, is it true you bought Camille's house? Why would you do that to your own daughter? Mama always said you were sneaky. Some sided with Camille, believing her twisted version, that I had plotted this scheme to take her home. Others stayed quiet, their silence louder than words. A few, bless them, sent private messages. Good for you, Aunt Evie. About time someone stood up to her. Camille herself flooded the chat with long, angry messages. She called me heartless, ungrateful, even jealous. You've always hated that I had more than you, she typed. I almost laughed at that. More. She had debt, arrogance, and a husband who couldn't hold water in his hands. I had peace, though it had come at a high cost. One night, close to midnight, there was a pounding at my door. I froze. My bungalow was dark except for the soft glow of the kitchen lamp. I shuffled to the peephole and saw Trent's broad frame on my porch. My stomach tightened. Mama, he shouted, his voice slurred, probably from drink. Come out here and face me. You think you're better than me. He kicked the step, the sound echoing in the still night. I didn't open the door. I called the police, hands shaking as I whispered my address. By the time the cruiser lights flashed down my street, Trent was gone. I gave the officers a description, but my voice was calm. Too calm even. They nodded, made their notes, and drove off. I locked every window and sat up the rest of the night with my Bible open on the table, whispering psalms into the quiet. The next morning, Ortiz called to tell me Trent had raised hell in their office too. Yelling, threatening to sue, demanding to know how some old lady had managed to buy their building. Ortiz handled it professionally, but his voice on the phone carried a weight. Ms. Monroe, he said gently, are you sure you want to keep these tenants? They're volatile. I thought for a long moment. Yes, I said. Because sometimes people need to sit in the house they laughed from, and realize the ground has shifted under them. Still the strain showed. Camille came by alone one afternoon, her eyes red, her lips trembling. She stood on my porch, the same porch where Trent had cursed the night before. She didn't knock at first, just stood there. Finally she whispered, Mama, please. Don't put us out. Noah needs a stable home. At the sound of my grandson's name, my chest tightened. But I held firm. Camille, the stability comes from you. Pay your rent. Follow the lease. Show respect. That's the stability he needs. She broke down then, tears streaking her cheeks. I didn't mean what I said before, Mama. About you being nobody. I was angry. I was trying to impress Trent. Please, give us another chance. I reached for the doorknob but didn't open it fully. I looked at her through the narrow crack. Camille, I gave you a lifetime of chances. This time the rules are clear. Meet them or the door closes again. Only this time it won't be me standing outside. Her sobs echoed as she walked away, and I leaned against the door, my heart aching but unbroken. That night, I sat at my table with the cure or quit notice still lying beside my teacup. The fallout had begun. Their anger, their shame, their desperation. It was all unraveling in the very house they thought proved they were better than me. And for the first time in years I felt no humiliation. Only a calm strength. Because humiliation had been the soil, and from it grew the deed with my name hidden in plain sight. In the weeks that followed the reveal, the storm began to change shape. It wasn't gone. No storm disappears overnight. But the thunder softened into uneasy silence. Camille stopped flooding my phone with angry calls, and Trent, though still puffed up with pride, grew quieter too. I heard through Ortiz that the late rent had finally been brought current, fees included. Autopay had been set up through the management company. On paper they were finally acting like tenants who respected the rules. But paper is one thing. Hearts are another. One chilly Saturday morning I was sweeping the snow off my porch when a car pulled up. Camille stepped out alone. She was bundled in a long coat, but her face looked thinner, her eyes tired. She held a thermos in her hands, like she'd brought me something as a peace offering. For a long moment we just stared at each other across the distance. "Mama," she said softly, walking up the steps. "Can I come in?" I hesitated, then opened the door wide enough to let her through. The kitchen smelled faintly of cinnamon from the rolls I'd baked that morning. She sat at the table where she'd once done her homework as a girl, and I poured her a cup of tea. For a moment she just held the cup, staring into the steam. Then she whispered, "I'm sorry." The words were quiet but heavy. My chest tightened. "Sorry for what, Camille?" Her eyes filled with tears. "For mocking you. For letting Trent treat you like that. For choosing pride over love. I don't even know why I did it. Maybe because I wanted to feel bigger than I was. Maybe because he made me believe appearances mattered more than family." I listened, my hands folded on the table. Her voice cracked. "When you stood in that office and showed us the deed, Mama, I realized I don't know you like I thought I did. You're stronger than I ever gave you credit for. And I don't deserve your forgiveness." I breathed deep, steadying myself. "Camille, I raised you with everything I had. Every dollar, every ounce of energy, every prayer. I wanted you to build a better life. But when you laughed at me, when you closed that door on me, you took more than shelter from me. You took my dignity." She wiped her eyes, nodding. "I know. And I can't take it back. But I don't want Noah growing up thinking it's okay to treat family like that. I don't want him to think it's okay to mock the people who love him." For the first time in a long while, I saw not the sharp-tongued woman who had mocked me, but the little girl who once clung to my apron, afraid of thunderstorms. My heart ached. But pain doesn't disappear just because tears are shed. "Camille," I said firmly, "this isn't about apologies alone. This is about respect. From now on you pay your rent on time. You follow the lease. You treat me with the dignity I deserve. Not as your landlord but as your mother. If you can't do that, then you'll have to leave. Those are the terms." She looked up at me, her lips trembling. "I can do that. I want to do that." I studied her face. I'd learned the hard way not to trust words alone. But there was something in her eyes, a fragility, a crack in the wall of pride, that made me believe she meant it, at least in that moment. We sat in silence for a while, sipping our tea. The kitchen clock ticked loud in the quiet. Finally, she reached into her bag and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "It's a drawing Noah made," she said, sliding it across the table. "It's us. You, me, and him. He drew you holding a key." I opened the paper slowly. The crayon lines were crooked but clear enough. A little boy with stick-figure arms, a woman with braids holding a golden key, and another woman with tears on her cheeks. My eyes burned and I blinked hard to keep the tears from falling. "That boy sees more than you think," I murmured. Camille nodded, her voice breaking. "Mama, I don't expect everything to be okay overnight. But can we try? For Noah's sake." I leaned back in my chair, the weight of years pressing on me. Forgiveness isn't a switch you flip. It's a door that opens slowly, inch by inch, if it opens at all. "Trying is all I can promise," I said at last. "But Camille, understand this. If you ever treat me as nobody again, that door will close for good. Do you hear me?" She nodded quickly, tears sliding down her face. "I hear you." That day she left the thermos on my counter, full of coffee she'd made herself. It wasn't much, but it was something. A gesture. A crack in the ice that had grown thick between us. When the door closed behind her, I sat back down and looked at Noah's drawing again. The key in my stick-figure hand glowed yellow, brighter than anything else on the page. It was more than a child's doodle. It was truth. I held the key now. To the house. To my dignity. To the fragile chance of reconciliation. And I would not let it slip from my grasp. Spring came to Cleveland, quiet and gray, the kind that sneaks in while you're still wearing your winter coat. The snow piles melted into thin streams along the curbs of Ohio City, and the wind softened enough to let me walk without hunching my shoulders. Life did not change overnight, but the edges of my days grew less sharp. Rent from Camille and Trent arrived on time through Ortiz Property Management. First once, then twice, then month after month. The late fees were cleared. The threats stopped. The group chat fell silent. Kept my routine steady. Church on Sundays. Groceries on Tuesdays. Tea before bed. I met once more with Attorney Morales at the library clinic, this time not to ask about forming anything new, but to put my life in order. Clear records for Lake Erie Trust LC. A simple will and instructions that if anything happened to me, the building would be managed without family drama. Order is a kindness to yourself, she said, tapping the folder. I believed her. I had learned how far a clean paper trail could carry a tired heart. When Mr. Ortiz called to recommend basic repairs to the duplex, new weather stripping, a proper fix on that drafty window, a small railing on the front steps, I approved every line. This was not charity. It was ownership done right. I chose materials that would last and asked for photos when the work was finished. Later, I stood on the sidewalk across from the house as evening settled, and I looked at the glow behind the curtains where my grandson slept. I did not go to the door. I did not need to. It was enough to know the roof was sound and the rules were clear. Trent stayed out of my way. Once I crossed him on the sidewalk in front of a hardware store. He nodded stiffly, jaw tight. I nodded back and kept walking. That was all. Sometimes peace is not hugs and apologies. It's distance that everyone respects. Camille came by twice a month, never unannounced. She texted first and asked if I had time. Her visits were quiet. She sat at my kitchen table with her hands wrapped around a cup, and she talked about Noah's school projects, about the new nurse at his pediatrician's office, about how the coffee shop on the corner started selling blueberry muffins Noah liked. I listened. I did not rush to fill the silence. Trust is not a faucet you turn on. It is a slow drip that gathers if you let it. One Saturday she brought Noah with her. He ran up my porch steps and nearly knocked me off balance with his hug. Grandma, I drew you another key. He waved a new picture brighter than the last. This time the stick figure key was above a little house, and 3 figures stood under it holding hands. My throat tightened. I taped the drawing to my fridge where I could see it every morning. Thank you, baby, I said. This one belongs right here. After they left, I sat at the table with the old blue folder and the recorded deed inside. I touched the paper lightly and then closed it, sliding it back into the safe. I didn't need to look at it as often anymore. Dignity felt less like a document and more like the way I set my shoulders when I stood up. In late May, Sister Loretta cornered me in the church hallway. You seem taller, she said with a smile. What changed? I laughed and told her I finally learned how to say no without explaining myself. He squeezed my hand. About time, Evie. We shared a plate of pound cake after service, and I listened to the choir warm up in the next room. The music wasn't perfect, but it was steady. That was enough. There were still hard moments. One evening, Camille cried on my couch and said she didn't recognize the woman she became around Trent. I told her I wouldn't tell her who to love, but I would not allow his choices to shape how I am treated. You don't have to pick between us, I said, but you do have to choose your behavior. She nodded. The next rent came on time and the month after that too. Small proof, real proof. I made a few new rules for myself. First, no surprise visits to their home and none from them to mine. Second, all money matters go through Ortiz, never through me. Third, if Camille or Trent raised their voice, I would end the conversation and try again another day. I wrote these rules on an index card and kept it in my Bible. Boundaries are not walls. They are doors with locks you control. In June, Mr. Lang at the library recognized me by the computers. Back for more auction lists, he joked. I smiled and shook my head. Back to return a book, I said, handing him a mystery novel. On the walk home, the sun warmed my face. I stopped by the park, sat on a bench and watched a little league game rattle past. A foul ball rolled to my feet and a boy in a red cap called out, "Ma'am, can you toss it?" I bent, picked it up and flipped it to him. My hip didn't protest. That felt like a victory all its own. By midsummer, the duplex felt less like the stage for our worst scene and more like a building I happened to own among the many buildings lining the street. The shine of revenge, if that's what anyone wants to call it, had faded, replaced by the plain light of responsibility. I checked the monthly statements, approved routine maintenance, and reviewed insurance renewals. I stayed in my lane. One Sunday after church, Camille and Noah walked beside me down Lorraine Avenue. We passed a busker playing a rough version of Lean on Me, and a breeze carried the smell of pretzels from a cart. Noah tugged my sleeve. "Grandma, can we get one to share?" We did. The three of us broke it carefully, warm and salty in our hands. For a few minutes, nothing in the world felt complicated. I do not pretend everything is healed. I still wake some nights and hear the echo of a door shutting in winter air. But now, when that memory comes, I see another door opening in its place. The old hurt is real. So is the life I built from it. If you had told me a year ago that I would hold the deed to the home where my daughter lives, I would have shaken my head. Yet here I am, standing on my own feet, choosing calm over chaos, choosing paper and patience over shouting. If you are listening to this and you've been called nobody by your own blood, hear me clearly. You are somebody. You do not need their applause to make it true. Your proof can be a ledger balanced to the cent, a key in your palm, a lease followed to the letter, a night of sleep you earned yourself. Justice does not need to be loud to be complete. Sometimes it is the quiet click of a lock you control. These days, when I pass the duplex, I say a small prayer for the people inside. Not for their comfort alone, but for their growth. I pray my grandson grows up seeing that respect is not a gift you demand. It's a practice you keep. I pray my daughter keeps showing up on time in payments and in truth. And I pray for myself that I stay steady. I want the power I found to be the kind that doesn't bite anybody, just holds firm. I'm not looking for a fairy tale ending. I'm looking for peace with my name on it. And I've got it now, on paper, in my posture, and in the way I speak my own worth. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.